She married him to save her brother's land. He married her because she asked. The letter from the land office arrived on a Monday, and by Tuesday morning, Oralee Dunning understood that her family was about to lose everything. The letter was addressed to her brother Calvin, who was lying in the back bedroom with a broken spine and no feeling below his waist. He had fallen from the barn roof 3 weeks ago, and the doctor in town had said the words permanent and paralysis in the same sentence, and then left without meeting Oralee's eyes. Calvin was 28. He had been the strongest man in Cedar Bluff, the kind of person who could lift a hay bale in each hand and carry them across the yard without slowing down. Now he could not sit up without help. The letter said that Calvin's homestead claim required proof of continuous habitation and improvement by a married man or head of household by December 1st. Calvin was not married. He was also, as of 3 weeks ago, unable to improve anything. If he could not meet the requirements, the claim, 160 acres of prime grazing land with a creek, a barn, and the house their father had built before he died, would revert to the government and be reassigned. December 1st was 6 weeks away. Oralee read the letter twice, folded it, and put it in her apron pocket. She did not show it to Calvin. He had enough weight on him already, the weight of a body that would not move, the weight of a future he could not see past the bedroom ceiling. Adding the loss of the land would break something in him that the fall had not reached. She had given up her own life to be here. Before Calvin's accident, she had been saving money to go to Denver, where a woman she had known in school ran a millinery shop and had offered her a position. It was not a grand ambition, selling hats in a city, but it was hers, and it represented something she had never had, a life that belonged to her rather than to someone else. She had been the one who raised Calvin after their parents died. She had been the one who cooked his meals, mended his clothes, kept his house, and managed his accounts while he worked the land. She had done it without complaint, because he was her brother and she loved him, but she had also done it with the quiet understanding that someday it would be her turn. Her turn had been 3 months away when he fell from the roof. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the property, the brown winter grass, the creek running silver in the low November light, the barn with the new roof that Calvin had been finishing when he fell. Beyond the fence line, the neighboring ranch stretched west toward the mountains. That ranch belonged to Virgil Teague. Virgil was 41, a widower, quiet and methodical, the kind of man who maintained his fence lines the way some men maintained their appearance, with attention to detail that bordered on compulsive. His wife had died of pneumonia 4 years ago, and he had lived alone since, running his cattle operation with 2 hired hands and a border collie named Spit, who was smarter than most of the people in Cedar Bluff. Oralee had spoken to Virgil perhaps 24 times in the 5 years since she had come to live with Calvin and help with the homestead. He was polite, reserved, and entirely opaque, a man whose inner life was conducted behind a door that he kept firmly shut. She walked to his ranch that afternoon. He was in the barn, oiling a harness. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and his expression, already neutral, became, if possible, even more neutral. Virgil Teague had the most carefully blank face Oralee had ever encountered on a living human being. "Miss Dunning," he said. "Mr. Teague, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear the whole question before you answer." He set down the harness. He waited. She told him about the letter, about the deadline, about Calvin's condition. She told him that without a married man on the claim by December 1st, the land would be lost. She told him that Calvin could not marry, even if there were a willing woman in Cedar Bluff. A man who could not stand, could not go before the circuit judge. And then she said, the thing she had rehearsed all morning, the thing that tasted like iron in her mouth. "I need someone to marry me," she said. "On paper, to satisfy the land office. The marriage doesn't have to be real. It just has to be legal." Virgil looked at her for a long time. His face gave away nothing. Not surprise, not calculation, not the faintest flicker of any emotion she could name. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, humming with a frequency too low to hear. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you're the closest neighbor. Because you know the land. Because you're decent, And I trust you. And because I don't have time to be choosy. She paused. And because you're the only man in this valley who would hear this question and not assume I was asking for something more than what I said. Something moved in his eyes. She could not tell what it was. December 1st, he said. Yes. That's 6 weeks. Yes. He picked up the harness again. He ran the oiled cloth along the leather in long, slow strokes. She stood in the doorway and waited, and the waiting felt like the longest minutes of her life. All right, he said. They were married the following Thursday by the circuit judge, who was making his monthly rounds and happened to be in Cedar Bluff for precisely 2 days. The ceremony took place in the front room of Calvin's house, with Calvin propped up in his wheeled chair as witness. Oralee wore her Sunday dress. Virgil wore a clean shirt and his good boots, and an expression of such studied neutrality that the judge asked him twice if he was sure. I'm sure, Virgil said, in the same tone he might use to confirm a feed order. Oralee signed the certificate with a hand that trembled only slightly. When the judge pronounced them married, Virgil looked at her with an expression she would spend weeks trying to decipher, something that was simultaneously formal and raw, controlled and unguarded, as if the mask he wore had slipped just enough to show the edge of something real before he pulled it back into place. They did not kiss. The judge raised an eyebrow at this but said nothing. Calvin, from his chair, watched the whole proceeding, with an expression that suggested he understood considerably more about what was happening than either of the two people standing in front of the judge. After the judge left, Virgil moved his things into the spare room, not the bedroom Oralee used, but the small storage room off the kitchen that she had cleared out the night before. He brought a bedroll, a change of clothes, and the border collie. Spit settled into the corner of the kitchen, as if he had always lived there, and immediately fell asleep. The first night was the strangest. Oralee lay in her bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in the house, a person who was not Calvin. She heard Virgil's boots on the kitchen floor, heard the creak of the storage room door, heard Spit circle 3 times before settling down. Then silence. She stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what she had done. She was married. Legally, formally, irrevocably married to a man she barely knew, for a reason that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with 160 acres and a piece of paper from the land office. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself it was practical. She told herself it was the same kind of transaction that happened all over the frontier. People joining their lives for land, for survival, for reasons that had nothing to do with the heart and everything to do with the dirt under their feet. She was not entirely convincing. The arrangement was efficient and awkward in equal measure. Virgil worked Calvin's land alongside his own, mending fences, feeding livestock, clearing brush, with the same methodical precision he brought to his own operation. He rose before dawn, did not eat breakfast, and worked until midday, when he came in for whatever Oralee had cooked and ate it silently at the table, before going back out. In the evenings, he sat in the kitchen and read the newspaper or whittled, and at 9 o'clock he said good night and went to the storage room and closed the door. He was courteous. He was helpful. He was also, Oralee realized, desperately lonely, and hiding it so well that she might never have noticed if she had not been lonely herself. The first crack in his armor appeared on a cold evening in the 3rd week, when the stovepipe clogged and the kitchen filled with smoke. Oralee was coughing and waving a dish towel at the haze when Virgil came in from outside, assessed the situation in 2 seconds, climbed onto a chair, and cleared the blockage with a length of wire he produced from his coat pocket. When he climbed down, his face was black with soot, and Oralee, without thinking, reached up and wiped a smudge from his cheekbone with her thumb. He went absolutely still. She pulled her hand back as if she had touched the hot stove, and they stood there in the smoky kitchen, looking at each other for a moment that lasted approximately 3 years. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," he said, in a voice that was not quite steady. After that, things shifted. Not dramatically. Virgil was constitutionally incapable of drama, but perceptibly, the way the season shifts when you cannot point to the exact day it changed, but you know the light is different. She saw it in small things. The way he talked to Spit, long, rambling conversations conducted in a low voice while he thought no one was listening. The way he paused sometimes on the porch and looked out at the empty range with an expression that was not sadness, exactly, but the memory of sadness, the ghost of a feeling he had learned to live around rather than through. The way he flinched, almost imperceptibly, the first time she accidentally brushed his hand while passing the salt. Calvin noticed it too, from his chair by the window. "He's in love with you," Calvin said one afternoon, watching Virgil repair the fence gate in the yard. "Don't be ridiculous. I've been lying in this chair for 5 weeks with nothing to do but watch people. He's in love with you. Has been for a while, I'd guess." Calvin looked at her. "Why do you think he said yes?" "Because I asked him. Nobody does something like this just because they're asked, Lee." She thought about that conversation for days. She thought about it when Virgil fixed the squeaking hinge on her bedroom door without being asked. She thought about it when he brought in firewood and stacked it by the stove in the exact order she preferred. Kindling on top, split logs on the bottom, though she had never told him her preference and could not imagine how he had learned it. She thought about it when she woke one morning to find that he had cleared a path through the snow from the house to the barn, and that the path was not straight, but curved slightly to the left, avoiding the spot where the ice pooled and she had slipped twice the previous week. He was paying attention, not the casual attention of a man fulfilling an obligation, but the deep, focused attention of a man who had memorized the landscape of her daily life and was quietly, systematically, making it easier. She watched Virgil more carefully, and the more she watched, the more she saw, or thought she saw, the architecture of something he had built around himself, a careful structure of distance and politeness that was not indifference, but its opposite. He was not keeping her at arm's length because he didn't care. He was keeping her at arm's length because he cared too much, and he had promised her a marriage of paper, and he was a man who kept his promises, even when they cost him. The land office sent a representative in late November, a young man with spectacles and a clipboard who examined the property, reviewed the marriage certificate, interviewed Calvin, and pronounced the claim in good standing. He filed the paperwork and left, and the land was saved. Oralee made supper that night, roast chicken, potatoes, the last of the canned peaches, and for the first time since the wedding, the meal felt like a celebration rather than an obligation. Calvin ate at the table, propped in his chair, and told a story about their father that made Virgil laugh, actually laugh, a sound so unexpected that both Oralee and Calvin stared at him, and Virgil looked down at his plate as if the chicken had embarrassed him. After Calvin went to bed, Oralee expected Virgil to announce his departure. The deal was done. The claim was secure. There was no reason for him to stay. He was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, when she came out and sat down beside him. "The claim is filed," she said. "I know. You can go home now, if you want." He was quiet for a long time. Spit was lying at his feet, and the dog's tail thumped once against the porch boards, as if offering an opinion. "Do you want me to go?" Virgil asked. The question was so carefully worded, so precisely balanced between hope and resignation, that Oralee felt her chest constrict. He was giving her the choice. He was making sure, absolutely sure, that whatever happened next was her decision, not his, because that was the kind of man he was. "No," she said. "I don't." He turned to her. His face, that carefully blank, rigorously neutral face, changed. It did not transform dramatically. It did not break open or dissolve. It simply shifted, the way a landscape shifts when a cloud moves and the light comes through. And underneath the blankness, she saw what Calvin had seen from his window, what Virgil had been carrying behind his closed door for longer than she knew. Not just loneliness, not just affection, but a deep, patient, unspoken love that had been waiting, quietly, without demand, for the moment when it might be welcome. "I married you because you asked," he said, "but I would have asked you myself if I'd had the courage." She reached over and took his hand. It was rough and warm and calloused, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that seemed impossible in a hand that large. They sat on the porch as the last light faded, and the stars appeared, one by one, above the mountains. Inside the house, Calvin was sleeping in his chair by the window, and Spit was snoring in the kitchen, and the land, their land, saved and secure, stretched out around them in the darkness, patient and enduring and real. "Virgil," she said. This marriage, it's not just paper anymore, you know that." "I know that," he said. The stars brightened. The wind moved through the winter grass. And Oralee Dunning, Oralee Teague, now, though she had not yet said the name aloud, leaned against her husband's shoulder and closed her eyes, and the arrangement that had been born of desperation became, in the quiet of that evening, something that looked very much like home.